Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. Uh, we're entering the new year. With New Year, we have you know new ideas of what may be next for us. I'm thinking of also how this idea of New Year's resolution and how we there's always this, oh, I didn't, after January, February, March is kind of this running theme that we don't really follow through on them. So a lot of times we it can be discouraging. There's a reason that each year we're always saying, "Oh, I want to do something better next year. I want to do something better next. What's next?" And sometimes, taking a little time and intentionality kind of flush out what that looks like. This year may be a year that you experience some loss in 2023, or before you're trying to step forward. Not to minimize, the holidays are hard for a lot of people, especially as you grow as adults. So this year may be something about bettering your self-care, maybe healing, maybe getting connected back to a spiritual church or an avenue of that nature, maybe in a more healthy way. Today we have a new guest. His name is Oty. As I said, Oty Curt. Thank you so much for Oty Curt, not with an
Thank you
S.
for
Thank
having
you
me.
so much for coming on and sharing your insight with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to share a disclaimer, especially if you're in the States. 988 is a suicide crisis lifeline if you are struggling, but wherever you are in the world, out beyond, try to find what resources. I don't like reinventing the wheel, working in the mental health field. I do feel that sometimes we forget that we have support around us, and just recognizing what they are. Maybe if there's not enough, maybe finding other avenues. It could be, it could be maybe a hobby, a group that you do, or something. Maybe you go for a walk or a hike every Sunday, or maybe just you go to church. Maybe that's familiar. If it's positive, whatever is positive, I do encourage you to reach out. And the hardest thing to ask as we are adults is, "I need help." So remember that try to find those environments. They may not be perfect, but just so you can ask those questions when you need it. So I start off with quote Oty because they always say things better than I. It's from Kristen Butler. She says, be a reflection of what you like to receive. If you want love, give love. If you want truth, be truthful. What you give out will always return." It's encouraging. What comes to mind when you hear this quote?
Well, it's the golden rule, really.
Mm-hmm.
What you give out is what you get back. And it's all throughout history and so many different pieces of literature. It's talking about casting your bread on the waters, and in due time, it'll come back to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if that reflection that you give is something positive, positivity will come back to you.
Yeah, and also what I feel like is the external side of you. People respond better if I was kinder with a softer approach. Most of the time, I'm approachable, and that could be a big deal, especially when you're trying to find out what's that or find out what support is out there. But also the internal part. One thing I realized, especially when I was struggling before, was if I held on, even if it was true, even if I said, these people didn't know what I've been through, which is, that's true. Maybe I say, oh, these people appear to be spoiled because I don't know. Right? These people are like, I can't connect. If I hold on to that bitterness, it doesn't really do anything but corrode. Like my character. Even though I'm right, in a weird way, I'm wrong. Because I'm not. At the same time, we're all kind of stuck in it. So I want to ask you. Well, I'm gonna kind of segue. Um, Building new positive habits. We're talking about what's next. Sometimes that's what people like to do. I want to do this better. I want to do that better. Um, it's simpler said than done. Why do you think it's simpler said than done? Building new positive habits.
It's the story of the world, man. Building a building is easy for an architect because he has a sheet of paper, he has his tools, but actually getting the materials and having somebody come out there and build something, it's not as simple as it sounds. And kind of piggybacking on what you said earlier about even though you're right, you're wrong. I wrote a poem, I remember, this was years ago, and in the poem it talked about a rose. You know, roses are beautiful, but they have thorns.
Yeah.
And so people will hold on to things. They'll hold on to the stem of the rose, and at first it hurts, and you don't feel it after a while because all the thorns are already in your hands.
Yeah.
And the wounds, they heal around the thorns, and you don't feel it after a while. And only when you let go of that rose, when you feel that pain again, you're truly free from it, because it's something that, even though you don't feel it, it's still there. That's one of the reasons why, in my mind, whenever somebody has an issue with me or I have an issue with somebody else, the most effective way to resolve that situation is to talk to them like they're human beings, not like they're a number or that they're just a customer or whatever it may be. But we're all humans, so connecting on a human level with somebody, I think, is the most effective way of resolving any issue, really.
Yeah, I do appreciate you mentioning that, because a lot of times, I'm half Hispanic, half South Korean, so I have both worlds of K-dramas and telenovelas to know that a lot of those series could be finished in 1 week after the first episode. Someone just talked to each other. I'm placating on that, but it is true. A lot of times we, procrastinate to paralysis. We're like, at the same time, I like what you mentioned, treating them like humans. A lot of times we may not understand. The person might hurt you. Person might, you might not agree with them, but you could agree on some of the simpler emotions. You must, anger, feeling unappreciated. That's a big one. We're right now in the world that's super fast. I say, "How are you, Oty?" And you'll be like, a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I'm busy." Oh, wow. Well, I'm busy. And it doesn't feel that there's a lot of presence around, and sometimes it's really not about you, or, the person may say something bad or made you feel bad, but a lot of times it's just being heard. A lot of times being heard that, this problem's not solved. I didn't really appreciate what you said, but I appreciate you tried. I appreciate you showed up and tried to make this work. And I a lot of times, it's those little steps. And I want to segue to talking about starting over, or the idea of what's next. Nicole Sabone says, sometimes the hardest part isn't letting go, but rather learning to start over. Like, we may have the insight like, oh, I have to let go of this person or this environment. And you see this a lot of times in the substance use community. They have to, a lot of times it's hard if you're, you have a condition where you're drawn to alcohol, or you cannot stop if you're around that environment. So sometimes letting go is, appropriate, logical, and all that stuff. But the starting over is the harder part. A lot of times, the starting, what's next? Okay, now I have all this time when I used to drink all the time, or all this other time, and not to be minimize it or to placate, because it is something that really breaks families apart. So at the same time, you're making this change, but what do you fill that time with? And I guess that goes to my question. What do you feel sometimes is hard for us to start over, even if previously it was unhealthy for us? What usually stops it? What is that barrier, you think, that usually prevents us to go further?
I think it's twofold, really. The first thing is the fear of outcome. It's a barrier to anything, because you consider, even, for example, if you have a job, you had to go for an interview first. I have yet to meet someone who says, I love interviews. They're the least stressful thing in my life. I would rather go to an interview than go to the beach or, go on a cruise. I've never met anybody like that, because the fear of outcome is a barrier to any endeavor, really. And the second thing is the fear of failure is greater than their faith. And once you realize that faith is the thing that overcomes fear, Jesus said you can move mountains. So there's nothing that God can't do when you have that faith in yourself, that he is true to his word, and that no matter what you endeavor upon, if you really have that, it's not a mentality. Mentality is the wrong word. It's a man-made word. But if you have that kind of chutzpah, that's the only word that I can come up with. The book of Hebrews says it perfectly. Through faith, they overcame kingdoms and they shut the mouths of lions, and it just envelops you in a way where no matter what the possibilities may be, your faith will overcome all of that.
And a lot of times I feel that sometimes there's too much of us inside of like the issue. For instance, those who may not be faith-based, but the idea of something bigger than yourself is very, sometimes what's in the barrier, honestly, Oty, is ourselves. Let's be honest. So like a lot of times, even I used to say, regarding faith, yes, I do feel there's so much wealth of knowledge of just being self-driven, outward driven, outward self. A lot of times we, like I mentioned before, procrastinate to paralysis. At the end of the day, we're too afraid, like you said, to fail. I do like I'm paraphrasing. Albert Einstein said something to the extent that that he didn't have a special ability. He was just passionately curious. And I feel like if we're passionately curious on things, we could kind of filter through what is really important in our lives. Why does it matter? A lot of times, I kind of, I try to touch bases on the like Mental Health Awareness Month in May and Substance Recovery Month in September. But a lot of times I try to emphasize on the people and their names. A lot of times we forget the names. Like if I wasn't touched by mental health, like I have been, I may not feel it's as important, because unfortunately we are very much self-interested. So that sometimes it's healing when you think outside yourself. You go to a faith community and you start saying things that are not just about you, because a lot of times, even if we're trying to help, a lot of times it's trying to help, and I'm not saying always, but we're trying to help in the context to kind of massage our egos. But when we're actually doing it, just like in the Bible, when I think one interesting story I remember in the Gospels, person was praying at the wall, and he kind of looked at him. He's a tax collector, and he's like, oh, that guy. God, please let me not be that person. I'm like, a lot of us do this. A lot of us do this, but at the same time, it's humbling, and there's a lot of insight. I want to ask you, Oty, what habits have you seen been helpful? You mentioned your faith, but like what else? And continue on that, and if there's more you want to add to that.
Definitely staying connected. That is number one. You have to stay connected spiritually. If you can't stay connected physically because you start over in a new place or you have a new job or whatever it may be, stay connected spiritually. I mean, there's so many ways now that you can connect with people that whether it be social media. You can still send them a letter in the mail. That still works the same in 1700 as it does today. You can do a whole number of things to stay connected. Isolation from the world is the tool that the enemy uses in order to convert you into a way of thinking that you are by yourself. In the Gospels, it talks about Jesus being with us always. No matter where we are, no matter what we do, he's there with us always. And so a person who is isolated, whether it be because they don't feel the worth or they simply just want to get away.
Mm-hmm.
That is not an effective way of starting over. One of the most, for me personally, when I had to go my whole journey, and it's a whole story, the number one thing that I thought about was not the first shortest, but the second shortest verse in the New Testament. The first shortest is in John, when it says Jesus wept. He's talking about Lazarus. And the second one is in 1 Thessalonians. Paul says, pray unceasingly. Don't stop praying, because that is what connects you, your mind, your body, really, everything connects you to a place that is apart from this world. Like you said, a higher place. That is the most important for me. For me personally, that's what it was.
Yeah, and when I think about the idea of starting over and why, on the other side of it, I would, there's only 24 hours a day, and we have to sleep part of that. If we think about this logically, we never, if we look at the idea of time, it's never enough or just too much of it. So like, and then we still have these New Year's resolutions that are hollow because we say them to be socially accepted. But the fact of the matter, we get pushed to say what our New Year's resolution is, but it's kind of like it becomes a tradition. And the problem with tradition, you lose meaning of what it is and why you're actually doing it. So in that respect, I do feel, I say this to my clients, people when I work in my field, is personalize your experience, your context. Don't say, oh, most people who are depressed, I shouldn't be depressed. I shouldn't. Well, you are depressed. Let's see what can we work here. Like maybe you get some help. Maybe you start, getting, like you said, isolation. Maybe, if this method of isolating doesn't help, maybe you should be open to try to seeing if there's other avenues. Another thing I like to say, and you said it, but I like to kind of emphasize is a lot of times I see people do well, let's say in medication or whatever therapies, but then they don't really have any social aspect. They don't have anything after. They're doing very well in recovery. And I kind of stress this a little bit more. It's if the absence of addressing a problem is not addressing the problem. So if you don't have any connections with people your age, or you don't feel really connected, don't leave it as that. I'm like, oh, well, I'm doing my medications well, I'm doing like everything else. Yeah, but you're still not addressing the other issues. And that only way that will work if you make it personal. And speaking of personal, I'm going to ask you, Oty, to kind of share a little bit what you can about your story, what brought you here, what drives you. And it's kind of, I like to get my guests to kind of share a little bit about themselves, especially so the audience get to know you, and also anything else you want to mention. The floor is yours.
I appreciate you. So it's a long story, but to condense it in a way that just pour my heart out in a way that would make sense to people. First of all, my name is Oty Curt. I was born in Hollywood, Florida, and my mother named me after her first love, who is not my dad. But jokes on him because he had 2 daughters before me, so I'm, the youngest. And somehow he agreed to it. So I'm stuck with Oty for the rest of my life. But fast forwarding, I worked at a big supermarket for about 6 years. I was going to dedicate my life to this place. I was going to be a corporate guy. I was going to, live that life and just go on vacation once or twice a year and then live my life and retire. Well, somewhere down the line, I had rediscovered my love of writing, and I wrote a book, and it was a very short book. It was a poetry book, of course. It wasn't anything fancy, and it had some mathematics and stuff in it. It was crazy. And a lot of folks that I worked with thought that something was a little loose up here, and they might have been correct. Long story short, I moved from Florida to Washington, D.C. and I lived on a couch for about 4 months, deciding what was going to be best for my life. And I was working at Starbucks, believe it or not. And during the course of my work, I overheard this old couple talking about Kansas, whispering. And I was like, what is in Kansas? What could possibly be in this foreign mystical place of Oz that nobody has any idea of? Well, another leap of faith, I decided I would go to Kansas, from Florida to Washington to Kansas, and didn't have any place to live, didn't have any plan to have a place to live. Actually, I did reach out to some place and got denied. And I said, you know what? This is one of those tests, because in what I believe is that there are certain tests in life, and there is no really pass or fail. It is a test of courage, endurance, perseverance. And in the course of time, while I was setting up all my things to move to Kansas, I was on a flight. And during the flight, as we were landing in Dallas, I was about 4 hours away from Wichita, and I received a text from someone. His name is Pete. And funny enough, he's South Korean as well, and he's amazing. I love Pete. And he said, I have a room if you'd like to come see it. And I called him immediately, and I said, I would love to come see it. And I took an Uber there, and long story short, I lived there for a year. I worked, I saved my pennies. I bought a house like 3 doors down from him. It was a 2-1 in the middle of the fields. And I loved it. And I was lonely. I really was lonely. And it was me, myself, and I. I had one suitcase when I got there, and I grew a life, and I started working for a cruise line in the middle of the country. And I met a woman who is now my wife. And the emphasis that I'm trying to make is that it's not impossible. Whatever you're going through, whatever challenges you're facing, they seem insurmountable. Imagine me, a person who didn't come from wealth, didn't come from an educated background. I dropped out of college. I had only what I had instilled in me through a spirit that is higher than my own. And it led me to places that I never would have imagined. And now I'm back in Jacksonville. We had sold the house, thankfully, and I'm starting my own business. And all of this occurred in less than 10 years. This all happened in 2017. My first day in Kansas was May 15th of 2018. I still remember the day, because that was the day that I was shook. Man, I tell you, I was shook. But it was such a blessing to have made those connections in Kansas when I never would have thought in a million years that I would be there. But through faith alone, I was able to surmount the obstacles, meet some amazing people, and grow in my faith, not only because I wanted to do it, but because other people wanted to do it. And that's the emphasis of community. I went there alone, but I didn't come out alone. And the most important thing is maintaining those connections. Now, unfortunately, Pete passed away about 4 months before we left Kansas. And I still remember his hospitality. He was a Vietnam War veteran. And he had, I'm not even joking, in his house, you walk in, there was a TV, an old Cartho Ray Tube TV, those big TVs. Right next to it was a massive artillery shell. I think it was an inert shell, but he had one in his house. And he would tell me stories of his time in Vietnam. And it was just the most amazing thing, because I was living in a house with this amazingly hospitable person, and I had my own room. There was another roommate, and we all just had this camaraderie together, just all different parts of the world that we were in. One came from Washington, another came from Illinois, I came from Florida, and Pete was just right there in the center, being the most hospitable, most amazing person that I could possibly ask for. And I'm just so grateful. I'm just so grateful.
Speaking of, I know this will, when this comes out, it'll be a little bit later, but today is actually Martin Luther King Day, Junior Day, when we're recording this. And I think of a quote when you were talking, paraphrasing, I don't have it in front of me, but he says, you don't need to see the whole staircase to take the first step. So, like, there's, a lot of things I loved about Dr. Martin Luther King was he really personalized service, how we serve one another, and also just like if you're a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper there is. The thing is, a lot of times we get caught up in titles and we lose our humanity that way. We lose who we are, really. And another thing I like to say from what your story, and I appreciate you sharing, is I came across, and again, paraphrasing from a quote from Jim Carrey, and it was interesting. He said, if you're unable to downgrade your life for a year, then you care too much what people think. And I think right now, it's words of wisdom. A lot of times, there's ebbs and flows. There's in faith-based circles, it's valleys, hills and valleys, right? So we have to be reminded that if I want to start getting into a new habit, maybe let's say it's health, maybe I want to go jogging, I'm gonna know immediately, Oty, it's gonna suck. It's gonna suck. And like the thing is, if we're gonna say, no, it's not, and like there's no shortcuts. And but the one thing I kind of been on my mind, I've been saying this in a couple of podcasts the last few months, was I think we forget the process being the whole point. So like if I was a basketball player, and all my goal was to win the NBA championship, was my only goal. But then I forego like the process of it. I may end up hating basketball. if all your life is about being successful, and then you become successful per se by numbers, but you may hate your life. There's a lot of other aspects, like I said before, the illustration of a person who may be doing well in recovery, but not very well connecting with those, or maybe forgiving himself, or maybe forgiving those around them, or trying to build, or like you said, improve on your connections. At the end of the day, it's not, the problems doesn't go away. So I feel like when we're, at least for me, I know I'm in a good space when I enjoy the process, even if it sucks. So sometimes it's hard. So like whatever you do, whatever you're passionate about, but I think it's inspiring when you know that you not only enjoy the outcome, which is nice. Everyone loves the outcomes, but also you enjoy the process, that kind of thing. So I want to ask you, as we kind of move forward, what has been a driver motivation to keep going despite setbacks? I know we like, it's encouraging when you see these stories that are like, how would you go to Washington D.C. to Kansas with like no real plan, and then come back to Jacksonville, and like it feels a lot, but like it's in the in betweens. Like life happens when we're planning for it. So what keeps you driven and motivated?
Well, many things, but fundamentally, it is being okay with being by yourself.
Yeah.
Being okay with knowing that in the future, the effort that you put in today will pay off. It's the same reason why a farmer plants seeds. He doesn't plant seeds just for the fun of it. He plants seeds so he can reap a crop. And so, not to say that whatever you do today is like debt for the future. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is your seeds that you plant, the faith seeds that you plant for yourself, knowing that God's promises are true, that He's faithful, that He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. when starting over, that's the thing. When starting over and you encounter those kinds of setbacks, you have to realize that your soul matters. Your soul is something that is so not touched upon in the common space of media and social media, because people like the outcome. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to do the things that require, and so it's the same way in life. Is even though you might not have a full-fledged plan, like you said, you might not be able to see the whole staircase, you still do it. Still do it. MLK, God bless him, he went to Washington, D.C., and I stood on those steps. There's a place when you go to the Lincoln Memorial where you can stand on the very same step that he stood on. And you think all of that was planned? In some place, he wrote it down on a piece of paper. Let me have 1 million people on the Lincoln Memorial and such and such. Are you joking? That is something that is a momentous occasion that can only come about by some radical change in thinking and some radical faith-based changes. And so having that in mind, if Martin Luther King can do it for those millions of people and inspire millions, and will it continue to inspire millions in the future? A person can do it. A person can definitely do it.
Yeah, and I do, it's the little things, what we do. Getting up, showing up. A lot of times, in ministry, it's hard. Churches are hard. We're gonna kind of talk about it. Sometimes churches is hard, but sometimes you can reframe things, how you look at it. It's hard. Well, because it's hard, that's why I'm doing it.
Yes.
So it's not like at the same time being conscious of my own abilities, because I do the sound in my church. I do a lot of things, and one thing I find, I look at people, not stuff. So we have nice equipment. So I say to myself, I feel like I'm doing better when I'm pushed out of the sound booth because there's all these young people. That is where I feel, for me, it's not about how good I am. I'm, just like Albert Einstein, I am passionately curious about everything. And for me, that has been a cornerstone of, a lot of times I feel we could get complacent as Christians or as faith-based and be have some sense of security. But I like wrestling with ideas. I like reminding of how Jacob wrestled with God. I feel it makes it real. It's not a bunch of stuff. It's not a bunch of things that happened a long time ago. It's real to me. Now, those who listen, a lot of times, I one thing that really made me passionate about, curious about bringing this podcast to the forefront was how many times I saw in church settings, and you could probably understand this, that a difficult problem comes up and it gets shoved under the rug. And, and people are like, well, there are different kind of ministries, and I know you're familiar. There's the obviously proselytizing, the evangel, you kind of evangelize the people, try to bring people converts. I know that, and that's wonderful things that they do. But for me, that's not what Revive Ministry does. But I do want it's outreach. I kind of look at the model of a medical missionary, where they go out and they bring a lot of material for people to kind of get first time some health needs addressed. A lot of times I see in churches a lot of people not hurt, too scared to say anything, too scared to say I'm hurting, too scared because if I say I'm hurting, then that means I didn't do something right. Well, no, and it's difficult and it's complicated, it's hard. And for me, I think about this and I'm thinking about the question, what motivates me? That's what motivates me. It drives me because it is complicated. It is hard. It's not easy. Some people will be like, well, you should, is that okay? A lot of times a lot of times before with suicide per se, they were like, you talk about, they're going to want to do it. And in most cases, they don't. because the fact of the matter is a cry for help. You know, a person can't jump from 1 to 10. You know, that's the one thing I feel a lot of times churches forget. The wonderful news of salvation is wonderful, but if the person never knew it, never knew a thing about it, understand the culture, and I would encourage leaders, those people who are out there, call the person back, call them back, follow up. It's messy. Ministry is messy, and I feel for those who are listening, those who are struggling, maybe church was hurtful for you. That's okay. You don't find what helps. And what I encourage in this podcast is hope. For me, I think finding something bigger than myself centers me, because I know myself. I'm selfish. I can be selfish. As much as I try to help people, I'm just human. I'm just trying to do, and those are the big lessons I've learned, because it's a constant kind of adjustment. It's like you're on a bicycle and you're learning to ride. You kind of have to kind of tilt it one way or another, but at the same time, I do appreciate those people who show up. People who show up. One thing, I'm not a parent myself, but I know the transition to being a parent, seeing my brother and some of my friends. There's no guide. There's no this is how it is. There's no okay, the second son it's no, it's not. Sometimes I was in an airplane and I was so amazed how much they cried in queue. They cried the whole flight from it was almost like a 3-hour flight. I'm like, that's either concerning or impressive. But at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, it's showing up. A lot of times, at the end of the day, that's what we need to do. And I feel if we, I don't like the word nice too much. And I've been kind of saying that, even though it's so drilled in. I was like, Oty, you're nice or whatever. We say it so much because when we're kids, we're like, the parents are like, be nice. What does that mean? I try to retrain and remind myself to be kind, because when I'm kind, I don't really expect anything back. I'm doing it because the notion with nice is that I'm trying to avoid an uncomfortable situation by navigating a conversation that's nice and less. And like you said in the beginning, if there is a problem, the best thing to do is talk to the individual. So last question for you is, what has been the biggest lesson you've learned or still learning when it comes to discovering what's next and starting over?
That's an excellent question. It's a developmental process, and I'll be completely transparent with you. I was just walking the dog the other day, and the way you get to my apartment here is you walk through this little corridor, and there's no sunlight in the middle of it, right? Because of physics, or anyway. So as I was walking through and I was feeling good, listening to my music, a thought hit my mind, and the thought was, it made me cry. I've never experienced, well, I'm not going to say I've never experienced, but the thought hit my mind where when you're walking in darkness, and I'm not talking about just your spiritual darkness, I'm not talking about the whole, oh, you gotta come to the light. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking everybody in some form or fashion is walking through darkness. They know that they're moving forward. They know they have legs. They know they have features, but they can't see themselves. But as you walk closer and closer to that light, two things happen. One, you know where you're going. And two, you know your identity. Your identity in today's world, for me personally, I've seen so much of a mind meld. It's just like a blender. You're going to be this. You're going to be this. When you're in school and you're in kindergarten, they say you're going to be a doctor, or you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a policeman. But that's not your identity. Your job title is not your identity. The fact that somebody is a parent, or that somebody's married, or something, that's not your true identity. When you come closer and closer to that light, and I'm going to piggyback off of what you said because it was powerful, then you start to understand, no matter what the world says, No matter how many boxes people put me into, I know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a child of God, then you have no need to worry about what boxes people put you in, because you know that is higher. That's a higher category than the world's categories. But going back to what you said about selfishness, amen. Let me just say that, amen. We are born selfish. You imagine when a baby is born, doesn't know anything about life, it doesn't know anything about paying taxes, doesn't know anything about making friends, connections. All it knows is it needs to eat, it needs to sleep, it needs to go poop, it needs to. Those are the basic things. But the moment that someone learns the word mine, M-I-N-E, it's all over.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the Christian has Jesus as its highest form of theology, right? Because, yes, there are other religions and there are other people who say this or that. But nobody can argue that Jesus was selfish, because Jesus is the ultimate epitome of selflessness. We talked about kindness. Kindness is one of the fruits of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So a person eats kindness from that fruit, eats from the fruit of the tree, that brings you kindness, and it emanates from you, right? That's just the way that those things work. I mean, if you eat a fruit off of a tree, you know, you eat it, you enjoy it, and it goes out from you. The same works spiritually. But to go back to your original question, yes, the biggest lesson is learning to stay connected, physically, spiritually, emotionally, financially, socially, all of the things. And I can guarantee, at least in part of my life, when those things are all working in harmony and unison, you don't got to worry about all of the categories that people put you in, because you're in God's category, and that's what matters the most.
Yeah, and I do feel when you get to the point where there's you're enjoying the process, then it's not, oh, I made it. It's, what else can I do? How can I improve this? What can this be better? And it just becomes, not arrives. We become something else, not just I am something else because I did this. I feel my curiosity is one of my best gifts. Being curious. A lot of times people are afraid. And I do Bible studies with some teenagers, some kids and one of the first questions I ask them is, why do you go to church? And a lot of people don't like that question, but I feel like if you're going to have any real conversation about anything, you got to go to the derivative. Those who remember math, you have to get to the derivative of what you're feeling. Well, I'm going to church. A lot of times kids go to church, let's be honest, because their parents bring them. That's why, But at the end of the day, we're here. What don't you like? And when you have those simple, not kind of expanded, or what you should or shouldn't do, or should, at the end of the day, they're going to do what they're going to do. So for me, I'm saying this not in reference to how to connect in the church setting, but how we connect in general. The fact of the matter is, understand people's interests, understand that, they not like, you may not like certain things, and at the end of the day, you just have to, I think as people, we kind of limit ourselves. We're like, okay, I need to have my hands cleaned all the time, especially all the stuff. In some circumstances, it makes sense, but in other circumstances, I do feel being intentional and being curious about what's next, being curious about, hey, this worked out for a while, but it's not working out so much now because the environment's changed, your priority changes. And I feel like just to mention about, what has encouraged me and been a big I guess cornerstone when I came to the faith was very different. I'll tell you that much. And I guess for me, I thought things very practically and logically. And one thing that encouraged me in the Old Testament, when they were describing God having no ends, and for me, I felt that was very encouraging, because I felt like that means that there's no boxing it in a nice, neat box. And I do feel that definition kind of shows that he's in the higher than us. And in a sense that it's encouraging because I'm embracing the unknown. It's like Hebrews 11:1. The whole idea of faith and how it's not it's the things I don't see. And in regards about our faith. And I think a lot of times when we talk about self-care, we're talking about what's next. There's a degree of faith. Degree. Not just gonna say I'm gonna do what's next. I have no faith in it. I have no confidence in it. There's gonna be something there. So, like at the same time, be curious. Those wherever you're at, find a good environment. Continue to improve your connections. I would say it's something I continue to try to do because it's a constant. It doesn't just statically work because environments change, people change, concepts change, ideas change, thoughts change. But at the same time, don't get caught up in that. Go to the derivative. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because I want a good relationship with my family. There's not much time. Perspective-wise, there isn't. So I would say be kinder to those around you. People tell me, I don't have time to volunteer. I'm like, well, when you go to a restaurant and they get your order wrong, be kind. The thing is, these people, these waiters and waitresses, they're it's not an easy business. The whole restaurant industry, wherever you go, when you're about to say something and you're frustrated, remind you that this person that's in front of you doesn't know that. It is not the cause of that. They made a mistake. And if we're really being honest, all of us have made those mistakes in our lives. Any final thoughts as we wrap up?
Final thoughts 2. Number 1, my famous tagline, I guess you can say, it's not mine at all. It's Teddy Roosevelt's. He was a very interesting character. First of all, before he was president, he was a cop, and he also wrote for a newspaper. Listen, paths, okay? People got paths. But I leave you with this. It is hard to fail, but it is worse never to have tried to succeed. That's number 1. So if you want to fail, don't try, because you will always fail if you don't try. And number 2, there's actually an acronym. Bible is an acronym. Basic instructions before leaving Earth. So read it. It's very important. And you might learn something or two. Just saying.
I just want to also say thank you. Thank you for coming on and sharing your insight. Also, to those watching, all the notes will share anything that that Oty wants to share, like in regards to any links or anything that he wants to share with you. Also, want to say to find Revive Ministries, the platform ReviveMinistriesFL.com is kind of the hub. So, and also, if you're out there and you're like, I have a story to tell, I want to share, email us. It's info@reviveministries.fl.com, and just tell me. And we're always looking for new guests. The whole idea is this is not. I just love that there's a diversity of stories and perspectives, and I want to say thank you again, Oty, for sharing your insight. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries. I'm going to end it with F. Scott Fitzgerald. People probably read his book when growing up, but he says it this way: it's not merely enough to have the ability to be persistent. You must also have the ability to start over.